Hey everyone, welcome again to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about movies off of the Rotten Tomatoes 200 best horror movies of all time list.
Nice.
I'm never gonna nail it. My name is Clay, and with me as always is Amanda. Amanda, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. And today we have a question for everyone, which is, do you like scary movies?
So bad.
Thanks. It's really the core question, the designing principle of this show, I guess. So it's appropriate that we have finally reached 1996's Scream, the Wes Craven classic, which is number 175 on our list with 79%. Yeah, it's pretty low. It's pretty low in rating and in percentage, surprisingly.
Yeah. I had no idea.
We actually recorded this episode a while ago with Wes from the Penske File, so we're gonna give you the little intro here, and then we're gonna drop you into that conversation. But had you seen this before? I'm gonna assume you had, because yes, everybody's seen this one.
Yes, I was a kid in the 90s.
Yes.
I have seen this.
Yes, growing up around the same time. I think we both crossed this movie's path around the same time.
Probably.
Had you watched it recently? I mean, I know I don't exactly remember what the timeline is for when we talk about it, but had you watched it recently since before we watched it this time? Didn't make any sense.
I think so.
You know what I mean?
No, I don't think so. I think this is one that was like I saw it a bunch. I think I even had it on like VHS.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, when I was like 10 years old or something. So I think this was like a very early horror movie for me that I watched a lot when I was younger, and then not at all like post high school.
Yeah, I had the same way. I also owned it on VHS, and I loved this movie. I watched it a lot. Oddly enough, I'm actually really looking forward to eventually doing Scream 2, because in the years since that's come out, Scream 2 has become this like the marker of a excellent sequel. And Scream 2 never really stuck with me. So I'll be curious to go back and watch that.
I don't really recall much about it.
Yeah. But Scream I had on VHS, and I actually when I would go to sleep, I still now when I go to sleep, I usually have a podcast or something going that I can just kind of sort of a white noise thing. I used to put on movies, and I would dial down the brightness on my television so I could keep the TV on, but it wouldn't be bright, but I could play a VHS tape.
Wow.
I tried to do that once with Scream, and I couldn't do it because I was trying to fall asleep, and the opening scene scared me so much. Even though I'd seen it like 4 or 5 times at that point, that guy talking and everything, I was like, I don't think this is very relaxing. Probably not the best movie for this.
Sign of a good scary movie, though.
I know, definitely. But we're going to take a quick break, play the trailer, and we will be back to talk about Scream.
Hello?
Hello?
Who is this?
Tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Someone is playing a deadly game.
It all began with a scream over 911.
Someone who's seen one too many scary movies. Now, he's taken his love of fear
Hello?
Hello, Sydney.
one step too far.
Do you like scary movies?
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a scary movie. Number 1, you can never have sex.
It's me.
Never, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back. Get another beer, you want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back.
He didn't make the rules.
The police are always on track if they watch prom night at same time.
He just kills by them. Don't answer the phone. Don't open the door. Don't to hide.
Everybody's a suspect!
Not scared, are you?
Scream.
All right, Scream, directed by Wes Craven, written by Kevin Williamson, starring Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Jamie Kennedy, Skeet Ulrich, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan, and Principal Arthur Fonzarelli. In his class, everyone gets an A.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Amanda, what happens in Scream?
I will preface this by saying this is probably my least favorite written of one of these blurbs that I use.
I'm excited.
I don't like it.
Is it better than the one for Society, which was like, young boy realizes his parents are wrong?
It's better and worse. Let me read it. You'll see what I mean. Wes Craven reinvented and revitalized the slasher horror genre with this modern horror classic, which manages to be funny, clever, and scary as a fright-masked knife maniac stalks high school students in middle-class suburbia. Craven is happy to provide both tension and self-parody as the body count mounts, but the victims aren't always the ones you'd expect.
You want to go through the whole movie while you're there?
I know, that's why it's just like, isn't Wes Craven brilliant?
Yeah, wow.
That
that's
was that
probably,
whole blurb. I'm sorry, everyone.
That might be the longest one we've ever done. That's interesting.
I should have just written my own.
No, it's fine. It makes my life easier when I have to do the write-up. I just copy and paste that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, Clay, would you like to hear about some things you can find in this movie?
Always do.
You will find budget Johnny Depp.
Very cheap.
Movie references. Aggressively 90s styling.
Yeah. Lots of big sweatshirts in this movie.
It's extreme. It's so 90s. More movie references.
Get away from her, you bitch.
One of like 5 different usages of Nick Cave's red right hand in 1996.
Yeah, it's like that must have been the year
Everywhere.
it came out or something, because it was in like 3 or 4 different movies.
Movie references.
The call is coming from inside the house.
And of course, questionable parenting.
Yeah, big questionable parenting in this one.
Yeah, lots of it.
So we will cut out here, and the next thing you will hear is the conversation that Amanda and I had with Wes about Scream, and we'll be back to kind of round it out for you guys.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Real Ripe and Real Rotten. This is a podcast where we look at the highs and lows of your favorite Hollywood celebrities. We're continuing our coverage of Wes Craven with his B-roll. You guys were craving more Craven, and here we are to talk about Scream. This is a podcast where we use Rotten Tomatoes to look at the high and the low of someone's filmography. And right now we're doing the B-roll, though, which is where we choose neither the high nor the low. We go with something that we think is more appropriate, something that we pick, something hand-picked, handcrafted, I guess you could say. My name is Wes. I'm joined by Clay and Amanda. Guys, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Amanda and Wes?
I'm pretty good. Good to talk to you guys.
We're all ready to go. We watched Scream.
I'm looking forward to talking about a universe where the school bus drops you off at your house.
Did you guys? I was listening to a podcast where they were going off on what's her name here? I can't think of
Neve Campbell.
Casey.
Oh, Casey.
Oh, the main
character of the movie.
The first one.
There's a podcast I was listening to just going off on her for riding the bus as whatever she is, a junior or something.
Oh, you mean Sydney?
Sydney. Who am I talking? Casey's the Reese. No, what the hell is going on?
Wes didn't
Drew
watch the movie.
Drew Barrymore, not Reese Witherspoon. Drew Barrymore is Casey Becker, so it's Sydney.
Did you know that Reese Witherspoon is in this movie?
But I don't know. Did you guys ride the bus for high school?
Yeah, I did. Well, until I got a car.
Yes. Yeah.
My high school didn't have a bus.
Wah, wah. Budget cuts at the state level.
Yep.
No, I rode the bus until a car became appropriate, but I don't know. I don't know if they say they're seniors or something in this, but I don't know. I thought they were being incredibly harsh towards the bus riding.
why were they going off on her about the bus?
I don't know. Just I guess this must have been a real upper crust bunch of 1%ers here who just don't ride the bus.
Yeah, there are so many other things you could go off on her about in this movie. Why pick the bus riding?
How much more upper crust can you be than everybody in this movie?
I know she has her father's like a mechanic. He dresses like a mechanic.
Yeah.
He lives in a beautiful palatial estate overlooking.
Everybody lives in a palatial estate.
Yes.
And that house at the end, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, is one of the biggest, most beautiful houses I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's apparently a real house too. That's like they didn't really do much with it.
I think you can even rent it on Airbnb.
Really?
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think so. I could be wrong. Don't quote me, but
this I find this movie distractingly 90s in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like I find it hard to differentiate the fact that it's a 90s, like a super 90s movie with what's intentional for style. Does that make sense? Like it's so 90s that I'm like, is this intentional or is this just a byproduct of the era?
Yeah, it sort of all of this stuff kind of happened very similarly around the same time, where as I was watching this, I was thinking to myself, this is like a horror version of Clerks, essentially, but it's not quite as, the dialogue isn't quite as on the nose. It's pretty close, but I think this style of dialogue doesn't age super well because for some reason in the mid-90s, it was like the first time people decided it was okay to talk about pop culture in like a as in a movie as though it existed out in the world of the movie and not just outside the world of the movie.
In a meta way.
Yes.
Being meta about things.
And it was all over the place. I remember I loved Mallrats more than Clerks because I was a huge comic book nerd and they would just the whole movie's them talking about comics. I tried to watch that recently, and I had to shut it off after about 10 minutes because I just was cringing the entire time.
Mallrats is really bad, though. We'll have to do Kevin Smith at some point because I think like the chasm between his good and his bad stuff is so like remarkable to me. But that's another thing for another point. Yeah, I just between like the actors like Nev Campbell from Party of Five, we've got Drew Barrymore, Courtney Cox, Monica's here being scary. We've got David Arquette before he was married to Courtney Cox. It's very just the way that it looks. I find it almost like distracting, and it has that like there was a certain way of when they filmed groups of teens in the 90s. They all look like this. Like this is just like how you shoot a group of teens in the 90s or whatever these people are supposed to be. I find it distracting almost in some ways. Like it has nothing to do with the movie. It's just it feels like if Craven's trying to get like the tropes of the slasher thing down, it bleeds so perfectly into the 90s vibe that it's really hard for me to distinguish between the two. And I almost see it as more of like a relic than an actual sort of like influential turning point in horror movies. Like it feels extremely old at this point. Just because of like Nightmare feels newer in some ways. Like it doesn't feel like as dated as Nightmare somehow because of the stylistic choices that I went with and the actors and all that stuff.
That's interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but I think in a lot of ways that's a symptom of trying to make something that feels extremely modern in its time, where the people who watched this when it came out in, what was it, 1996? When you see that in 1996, it feels very modern. It feels very like trendy and on trend. And so I can see how in the moment it must have felt like, wow, yeah, this is really capturing the youth. And now, 20 years later, it's just like, yeah, a relic. It feels very, very old.
Did you guys like this? Did you guys? Sorry, go ahead, Clay. But my point, like, did you guys enjoy this movie? Just so we can be upfront about it, or like, do you think this is a good movie?
Yeah, I still really enjoy this movie. Again, I think the beginning still works pretty well, despite its dated dialogue and self. It's not self-referential. I guess it's kind of self-referential. But I was just going to say that datedness is kind of by design. I was watching a documentary about the making of it, and they mentioned how Kevin Williamson specifically wanted it to feel of the moment and not feel. He wasn't going for timeless. He was going for very much. This is a movie of the time that it's being put out. So that you're probably right that it does feel more dated than a Nightmare in a lot of ways, because if you look at Nightmare, the style and of the world doesn't feel particularly like 1984. It just feels kind of like general.
Yeah,
it's fairly bland.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this is very much rooted in 1995, 96. So I guess he kind of decided to go in one direction versus the other and take with it the pros and cons of that decision.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I actually, sorry, I just piggybacking off of what Clay said, I kind of like that because to answer your question a second ago, Wes, if I like the movie or not, I like everything of the movie except the scenes that Billy is in until Billy is revealed to be the killer.
Mm-hmm.
We can get more into that later.
I don't mean to cut you off. There's a bit of foreshadowing that I never caught.
The Don't Fear the Reaper.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't notice it until this
that
time. I was because it's such a different version of the song. It's like an acoustic version of Don't Fear the Reaper. And I was sitting there, I was like, what is this song? What is this? Like, oh, it's Don't Fear the Reaper. I was like, what foreshadowing?
Yeah. Their romantic moment.
Very clever.
But talking about the intentionally dated aesthetic of that movie, I kind of liked it because in a lot of ways, like I was really young. I saw this pretty close to when it came out, which would have put me at about 8 or 9 years old. So it was actually one of the first horror movies I ever saw. And
Welcome to the jungle.
I know. But something that's kind of great about the fact that it is so specific to its time, I don't think I've rewatched it since I was really young. And rewatching it now, I remembered so much of my feelings then and the feelings I had about that movie and the different beats and the moments and the reveals and the various twists that I actually kind of liked the fact that it was so dated. It made it so specific that it really conjured up that time for me, at least.
Matt Lillard, I mentioned if you guys liked it because Matt Lillard had a funny quote about it that I thought was I didn't realize until he said it that I think I kind of agree with. He says the first 10 minutes and the last half hour are great, and the middle is a slog. That was basically his description of it. And
yeah, I don't think I necessarily disagree with that.
Yeah,
I wouldn't call it a slog, but
they had to insert the principal killing because there was no killing in the original script for a long time. Yeah,
I looked it up and I did read that because watching it through this time, I was going, why the hell does he kill the principal?
Yeah. It apparently fixed a script problem, though, because they couldn't figure out why to get rid of the kids at the end. The kids who aren't part of the story, they have to have the reason. They run off when they hear that the principal's been murdered, and they needed to clear the house, and they couldn't think of a reason why, but it worked in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've always kind of there's a few movies that I saw from around this time, so I would have been 10 or so, that I think were a little 10 or 11 that were a little bit above my pay grade as far as the plot goes.
Your pay grade as an 11-year-old.
Yeah, my pay grade as an 11-year-old. I very clearly remember them being this one and Mission Impossible, the first Mission Impossible, which I don't know if you watch that movie now, I don't think I could tell you what happens in that movie or what the plot is.
No, it's super complicated. Yeah.
All of those are.
This one is less complicated, but I still remember not totally shaking out exactly what was happening. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know how you guys feel about this, but it feels like, to use a wrestling term, that the story's a little overbooked, in that when they finally lay out what the plot is, it's really, really a lot of backflipping going on. The whole Cotton Weary thing, that whole plot line feels sort of, I don't know. It just feels like there's a lot going on that takes a lot of explanation.
Why does Liv Schreiber play that Cotton guy?
I can actually tell you that. I know why that is. Because he had done a movie with Dimension called Phantoms, in which Affleck is, of course, the bomb. And he was friends with one of the producers or something, and the producer was like, we need someone to play this 5-second scene. can you do me a solid and just come over and hang out for the day? And he's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, because he's only in that footage, like the reporter footage, I think, right? That's the only time you ever see him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that whole thing, even when I was watching it at the time, I kept thinking, oh, well, they show this guy's face. He must be coming back in some capacity.
Well, doesn't he show up in the sequel?
He does.
Yeah.
But yeah, that element always stood out to me as kind of strange that they sort of lay him out as a red herring, but they never really do anything to bolster that. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of plot stuff trying to support what is more or less a pretty straightforward slasher story.
I mean, Dewey and Gale, I think, are somewhat unnecessary characters, really. And they have a lot of screen time between them. So, like David Arquette and Courtney Cox's characters they're functional and they're involved in the plot, but it's almost like superfluous information that Gale provides, really, about everything. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, I guess this kind of sets the stage for the reveal of like the mother and everything like that. But there are a lot of characters who end up just being murder bait, I suppose, by the end of it, which is fitting of the movie, and it's kind of that tropiness. But I don't think it really drives the narrative in the middle of the thing. They're
murder bait, but none of them get killed.
I would disagree.
I'm thinking the friend is, I guess, who I was thinking.
Tatum.
Yeah. Of
Tatum.
all of her friends, only one of them gets killed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the point of having that many characters around is it places a lot of different people who are red herrings about who's the killer.
Yeah. And at least they get hurt because you know, there's nothing worse than having a bunch of characters like that and then they just kind of get off scot-free. Everybody gets it a little bit.
The opening is still iconic. I think the opening is the best part of the movie. There's one. There's one section actually later that I really like. I'll just say now is the when they're at the party and Ghostface sneaks up on Jamie Kennedy, who's watching watching the movie, saying "Look behind you." But then that's good enough. But then it cuts to the surveillance van, and they're watching it, going like, "Look behind you." So
it works on an even a third level. Because what he's saying is, Jamie, look behind you.
Oh,
Jamie,
really?
look behind you. And I never put that together. Yeah. He was like, he's essentially talking to his own character in the movie that he's currently in.
Yeah.
So this is like, when they did that must have been like a meta explosion.
Yeah, I like that moment. But other than that, the intro is really what I think holds up well across everything else. I think that it was kind of tricky at that point where they cast Drew Barrymore and she's prominent on the poster, and then they kill her off in the first 10 minutes or whatever. And I think they do a good job of they balance. It's probably the closest that the movie gets, I think, to balancing the comedy, satire, and the horror aspect of it, because I think it's legitimately scary, and her body hanging from the tree is probably like the most frightening thing that happens in it, I guess. But they also do a good job of really setting the stage of the repeated runner joke that people can just beat up Ghostface as he's chasing them.
Yeah.
And I like that, and I think it's clever, and I think that it works well. I even don't mind the dialogue that you were mentioning, Clay. I think that it works pretty well in like the way that the script is trying to be that sort of meta thing. But I think the opening works almost as a short as to what this movie is supposed to be, and I think it's effective at it.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters? What's yours?
Guess.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers?
Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right. I like that movie. It was scary.
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
So, you got a boyfriend?
Why? You want to ask me out on a date?
Maybe. Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
What did you say?
Yeah, I like how it also, going back to A Nightmare on Elm Street, it sort of echoes Tina's killing at the beginning of that movie, where you start with this, cute blonde girl with a bob who is sort of having, her boyfriend's there, her boyfriend's not there, like, and you think she's going to be the main character, and then she's very brutally murdered in front of you, and the whole narrative has to pivot to focus around somebody different.
Yeah, there's a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street parallels in this, I think.
Like the
not
janitor,
not just
Fred.
Craven dressing up like Freddy Krueger. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've got dollar store Johnny Depp, Skeet Ulrich crawling in through his girlfriend's window.
Whose last name in this movie is Loomis.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is the psychologist in
Halloween? Dr. Loomis from
Yes.
Halloween, and which actually it also comes originally from Psycho, because the character of the brother of the girl one of the girls who gets killed, I think his last name is Loomis. Yeah, it's actually, I believe it's actually Sam Loomis, which is I think the Donald Pleasance's character in Halloween. But yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. Like she. When Drew Barrymore's parents come home, the father says, go run to the Mackenzies and call the cops, which is exactly what Jamie Lee Curtis says to the kids to do in Halloween.
Oh, nice.
So there's a lot of like, my favorite one, another one which I didn't notice until this time, Linda Blair is in this movie.
Wait, where?
Yeah, Linda Blair has a cameo as a news reporter. When Sydney comes to school, there's a reporter who gets in her face for half a second.
Is she the one who yells, "How did it feel to almost be butchered? The people have a right to know."
That's it. Yep.
Yeah.
And then and I was like, is that Linda Blair? And she's wearing cross earrings.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
yes.
that's a good one.
Huh. Yeah. I mean, it's the Rotten Tomato thing, right? It says it's a little too cheeky for some people.
Mm-hmm.
Is
That's
it?
fair.
Do you guys think that's fair?
I mean, I guess.
Is it too cute? Is this too cute of a movie?
I don't think so. I think I would much rather watch this than watch like Friday the 13th Part 5, where the entire thing is a giant joke.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I think they're riding the line pretty adeptly. Am I using that word? I think I did this the same time last episode. I don't know words. Limited vocabulary. Where I think there's a lot of funny stuff in it, but I don't think it's ever played as straight up, we're making a big, huge joke here.
Mm.
And I guess as it was in production, a lot of people passed on it. They asked Sam Raimi and I think a couple other fairly famous horror directors to do it, and they all passed on it because they thought it was a comedy.
Yeah.
I'm surprised Sam Raimi didn't get the joke because he's kind of the master of the horror comedy. But I think this is an instance of director casting working where it didn't work in Vampire in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Because this was a script that is on the page apparently very funny. And then they got Wes Craven and said, all right, make a horror movie.
Yeah.
And so they managed to blend it the right way that doesn't quite work in Vampire in Brooklyn.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's got that same 90s feel that something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer has, where everybody speaks in this very specific way. Like even the cheerleader talking to her friend in the bathroom while Sydney hides in the stall.
That was a performance. Yes.
Yeah. And it's this like the character that would stereotypically be the blonde bimbo cheerleader, and she's like, well, psychologically speaking, this is a deep level of trauma. So, and it's like, what? Nobody talks like that.
I actually thought about halfway through this movie that I think Buffy probably got greenlit because this movie did so well.
Oh, yeah. I think so, too.
Sydney, the way that she handles stuff feels a lot like Buffy. The dialogue it's not quite Joss Whedon dialogue, but it's pretty close.
Yeah. Proto Whedon.
Yeah. And it has a lot of the same kind of vibe as Buffy the Vampire Slayer also had, which it was only, I think, within a year or maybe, a year or two between this and Buffy. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were related.
Yeah.
I wonder, they sort of, I guess we can talk about performances, but Matthew Lillard, to me, is funny in this in a way that, like, the actors turn in performances sometimes that, like, borderline annoy me somehow. Like, there's something grating about the performance. Like, he's too, like, grabby or too over the top or something, but I don't think it's a bad performance, on the other hand. And I think Lillard does that. He's kind of like that actor. Like, that's his thing, is to sort of walk that line about being, like, too broad in what he's doing.
This is Benicio del Toro in Usual Suspects level of turning a character from nothing into something.
into something, yeah. And he sticks out. And, you know, I think that acting wise, I think it's all kind of fine, I suppose. Like I don't really say that I would enjoy this movie like on a repeated rewatch. It's funny because I had watched it actually probably like a couple weeks ago, just independently of this, and then I had to rewatch it again last night. And I don't think it's a bad movie. I guess this is a good place as any. Like, we haven't talked about jump scares in movies, horror movies.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't like jump scares. I think they're kind of lazy, and I think that they are annoying in the fact that now they're so commonplace that most jump scares are just fake red herring jump scares that are designed to get you. And Nightmare had a little bit of that. I don't think Vampire had much of it at all, but I think Craven like goes really hard on the jump scare aspect in this movie. And it's funny because I guess how do you guys define a jump scare? Because I think that in all horror movies you're going to have something that's like a startling scare. But I think there's a difference between seeing something visually disturbing quickly and having just the camera panning and then something out of screen just pops into screen and a loud noise plays. And you're supposed to be like, you're building, waiting for that moment. You know it's coming, and then it comes and it startles you. But what do you guys think about jump scares? And I think that this movie leans way too heavily on jump scares, even though it's part of this genre. I don't think I really like that part of it.
That's, it's interesting you should say that, because I actually don't feel like there were that many jump scares in this. I don't know if that's just me, maybe because I like I said, this is one of the first horror slasher movies I can remember ever having seen. So I think I have very vivid memories of it. So maybe there was less of that anticipation there for me. Like I kind of knew when Ghostface was going to show up.
Yeah, but and that kind of goes to my point, though. Like, a lot of it is built on, something is going to happen.
Right. It leans really heavily on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I can see it. The thing I think makes it pay off a little bit in this movie is the reveal that there are two killers. So you're sort of throughout the film being like, but how did he do that? How did he get from point A to point B so fast to jump out in front of her and scare her? And I think having the payoff that it's two different guys actually makes those jump scares work a little bit more narratively, but that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I think where the jump scares work the least is in that middle of the movie, because it does feel like they're trying to keep things, tense and jumpy. So that's when you get that scene where they attack Sydney at her house, which, now that I'm thinking about it, why would they do that? If the whole point of the plot was to blame everything on her dad, why do they try to kill her at her own? I don't know. Whatever.
I think part of it is they get off on scaring women.
Yeah. But yeah, like that sequence feels kind of weird because it does have that jump at the end where Billy kind of like jumps into frame through the window, sort of.
Yeah, I forgot about that one.
They have one at the end where Jamie Kennedy pops into frame out of nowhere, and he says a joke and then gets stabbed or something. Like I just think it's the only aspects of this movie that I would say are scary are the jump scares. It's the only thing, because I don't think Ghostface is almost comical. Like, he's not scary at all, really, kind of interestingly.
Yeah, which is interesting to me, because like by design his look is dime store Halloween costume. Literally, that's what it was. They backed into the design because they found a dime store Halloween costume that they loved.
I think they even say it in the movie.
Yeah. But I think you can make that's a fairly iconic look, and I think if they wanted to, they could have made that thing a lot scarier, like visually scary. But yeah, it is pretty much played as, it seems to me watching it, that even though the design of it is dollar store or dime store Halloween costume, they are so aware of that they don't really like to give you a good look at what his deal is. It's a lot of quickly moving past the camera, a lot of, face close-ups. I mean, the face is the whole thing, but the rest of him is just kind of like a phantom. But they don't really do a lot with shadows with him. Like I found myself wishing that there was a scene like where the principal gets killed, he's got all the lights on. It's not particularly a scary scene. It's just a lot of like, yeah, you're waiting for when's he going to show up or when is he not going to show up. And I was kind of waiting for a scene in the movie where they have like someone standing near a shadowed corner and like just the face comes into view or something, something like a little bit more visually.
A Halloween reference.
Yeah. Like something just a little bit more visually interesting. But I think another thing I did want to talk about was kind of go into that a little bit. I think this movie is actually pretty realistic looking. Like much more than Vampire in Brooklyn. We were talking about how Vampire in Brooklyn had this sort of like artificial sheen to it. It looked very slick. Yeah. I don't think this movie feels that way at all. No. And I think it really benefits because of it.
The Ghostface thing, I understand, like they don't stylize Ghostface because he's supposed to be this sort of like realistic turn of these kids are not like supernatural monsters, really. Right. Like it's just kids in a costume who are running after people stabbing, and that's why they always get kicked down or trip or get kicked in the dick 100 times in the movie. And so the costume works on that level because it's just a kid wearing a costume who's chasing people around with a knife. Yeah. But if you remove that scary slasher element that even Krueger has, you're really left with just jump scares at that point. You don't have anything psychologically or like hiding in the shadows or darkness or like you can't act like a supernatural force that comes out of nowhere. He hides behind doors, and he comes out from behind a door.
Even in the final sequence at the party, that house has the lights on the entire time. Yeah, yeah. There's no moment where like they cut the power to the house or something, and then it's Sidney fumbling around in the darkness trying to, while Ghostface was doing whatever. It's all very brightly lit. And I wonder if that's also by design because it's, the idea of having this horror in the bright light versus keeping it to the shadows.
Yeah, and I think the appeal is more towards messing psychologically with the viewer rather than the characters in the movie. Like, I actually think it's really... It says something that most of the characters beyond, there's Sydney, Tatum, and Gail. And there are no other women, really. Yeah. And that leaves you with a very broad field of which of these dudes is the murderer. Yeah. And so, and I would argue other than Dewey.
Because it takes a man to do something like that.
But other than Dewey... At some point, aspersions are cast on every male character in the movie, like Billy, Stu,
Jamie Kennedy.
Jamie Kennedy's
What's
character.
His name? What's that character's
Randy?
name?
Randy.
I think it's Randy.
Okay.
The dad, Sydney's dad.
I've never bought the dad. We can get into the red herrings in a minute, but finish what you're talking about.
But I think that the fact that the dad shows up very, very briefly at the beginning and then disappears and they can't find him. Sure. And if you're watching this movie when it was made, part of you is going to be thinking, well, yeah, I mean, maybe it is the dad. Like, he did disappear. We don't know. Even the principal, at a point, when he's berating the two kids who are also...
That's one of my favorite scenes, I think.
Apparently,
so good.
Apparently not in the script. Like, that scene is in the script. But Henry Winkler doing that with the scissors was he did that on by himself.
But I'm so glad he did because it gives you that moment of, wow, he seems really comfortable with that very sharp object. Yeah. So it's like every man in the movie for at least a split second when you're watching it, it runs through your head like, is it him or is it him or is it him? So I think having kind of back to something I think Wes said at the beginning of this, having that cast of characters that might seem superfluous kind of serves the purpose of scattering your attention as a viewer.
Muddies the water.
And exactly.
I think the thing that made the story confusing to me when I was younger is sort of a proto version of my theory about environment when it comes to movies like this. Because, as I said, you were talking about the father. I never thought the father was involved because I remember watching this when I was younger and completely forgetting the father was even a character. Yeah. Because he's in it for half a second and then he's gone. And then at the end, it's like, oh yeah, where's her dad? oh yeah, we found his car.
They have
here he is. He's been tied up.
one scene in the police station where he's not staying at the hotel that he told her that he's staying at.
Yeah, and then Randy has a line when they're in the video store where he's like, just in passing mentions that they can't find her dad.
Yep.
And I think that's why it doesn't work for me, because it does that thing that Star Trek does a lot, and Wes, that we talk about on Deep Space Nine, where they're talking about a lot of stuff that you haven't actually been privy to.
Yep.
Like, you're not seeing it happen, they're just talking about it. So they're talking about the dad who's not there, but they're only talking about him like very briefly. They're talking about all of this stuff with the mom, which is a character we don't know and have never met. We're talking about stuff with Billy's family, who are characters we've never met. And it's a weird, they're kind of,
you know what the funny thing, this might kickstart you, but you know what the funny thing about the mother is, like, this fits into your, they're just doing a lot of referencing, right? So when they show the mother, and it cuts to this scene where Sydney's at her house, and they show the mother on the news, right? And they say, a year ago, this woman was killed and raped and killed by this thing. And you go, oh, it's like, that must be Sydney's mother. She goes, the next scene is she sits down on the couch and picks up a picture of her and that woman from the news report standing together, just so that the movie can really hammer home, this is the relationship, because you haven't had a scene where those two actually exist with each other. They've only told you about it. So they need you to know that this is the relationship between the two of them.
Yeah, it feels to me, I think when I was watching it when I was younger, it felt weird because that's not what the movie felt like it was about.
Yeah.
It's about those teenage characters. And so having all of this superfluous stuff with the parents never really felt genuine to me.
It's all to provide motivation for Billy, right?
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. And
but I actually, my big problem with it, because I also have a problem with it, I actually think it's the weakest part of the movie, is trying to kind of shoehorn in this backstory. I'm so much more into it when Billy says it's more scary when there is no motive.
That line and the line about movies don't create psychos, movies make psychos more creative.
Yes.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
Because he's a disaffected white guy who seems like he's not as rich as everybody else around him. I could very easily see that being the driving motivator, more so than his mom leaving.
Only 4 bathrooms in his house growing up.
Yeah, only 4 bathrooms.
Pathetic. Yeah.
But and I think that would tie, because clearly what this movie is doing in a lot of different moments is tying itself to horror classics, especially Halloween. Like especially that third act where they're, after the house party, where Halloween is on in the background, and they're even like, Dewey is going through the house by himself with his gun drawn, and the lights are all out. That's like the one part where it's kind of dark. And it co-opts the Halloween soundtrack.
Yeah, they use the soundtrack from Halloween pretty well.
Like entirely. Even, Jamie Lee Curtis's famous screams they become part of the Scream soundtrack.
Yeah.
And I lost where I was going because I just got interrupted by a dog.
Well, Billy, the Billy and Stu were a conscious decision, I guess. There was some hemming and hawing about behind the scenes whether or not they wanted to give the killers motivations or not. And so they split the difference by having Billy be motivated, and Stu just says he does it because of peer pressure. So it's like basically a non-answer. Yeah.
I would have liked it if they were going to go that way. I would have liked it the other way around.
You would have had Billy
had
be
motivation, and Billy was peer pressured.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think Billy is clearly the driving force behind it.
So it couldn't be peer pressure. I mean, I think you'd have to give him a different motivation that could be equally random.
Yeah, it could be that he's just psychotic and enjoys
crazy.
Inflicting pain. Can I ask a question? And this might be a weird question for me to ask to heterosexual gentlemen.
Here we go.
Do you think Billy is supposed to be read as creepy for the whole movie, or is he supposed to be charming at some point?
Well, I don't know if this helps answer it. I don't know if it does or not. I was watching a documentary, and they were talking to the casting director, who was hilarious. And her comment on casting Skeet Ulrich was, I was doing the line reading in the audition, and I just thought to myself, he's so hot. That was her entire comment.
I mean, he's a good-looking guy, but there's something,
I
even
think,
in his gentle, quiet moments, there is something so genuinely unsettling about him.
I think that's by design because they're
playing up that. Yeah, they're really going
They do
after
such a good job of making it seem like it has to be Billy and then pulling that out from under you, and they do it very well.
That's
like
true.
the first time when he gets arrested, that not going through because I don't know, I forget what the technicality is. But
his phone records are clean.
yeah, the phone records are clean.
Because
That
the
works
two of
out
them,
well.
it's the decision to have two killers instead of one gives you a kind of what's that Hitchcock story dial M for murder? Is that where or the perfect murder, right? Whether you each do a crime that the other one can't be connected to, and it's random, so it fits
right,
with that.
right. And the second one, which I think is brilliant, is when they fake kill him.
Yeah.
I thought that's really good. I think that's a great way to get him off the board again, to make it that much more shocking when he turns out to be alive and also the killer.
Mm-hmm. The when I don't know why I thought of this. I think there's one big mistake in this movie. Actually, I mean, it's probably a nitpick or something. But at the end, when she's they've won and Billy's laying dead on the floor, and Jamie Kennedy's like, "Get ready for the one last jump scare." And then he jumps up, and then Sidney shoots him and says, "Not in my movie." Shouldn't she shoot him before he jumps up and say that?
That's actually a pretty good point. Yeah, I can see why they opted not to do that, but yeah, you would think that would make more sense.
I'm guessing they had him sit up first because it makes her less bloodthirsty.
Oh, but I think the joke works better if she's just like, no, fuck that. She just shoots.
No, I agree.
I agree. Yeah, I think the joke
agree.
works better. But yeah, I think they wanted to actually. I think it's one of those things where they get into a meta chicken and the egg situation, where where Jamie Kennedy says this is the part where he comes back for one last scare. So is the audience then expecting him not to do that? So in that case, if they're expecting him not to do that, do we then have to have him do it?
Yeah, it's a real blue balls of a situation to just bring it up and not follow through with it. Skeet, skeet, skeet.
Jesus. Ulrich.
What kind of name is that? Skeet Ulrich.
I don't know. It sounds fake.
So I have to ask you, Wes.
Yeah.
When we talked about A Nightmare on Elm Street, you had a lot of thoughts and questions about the concept of people who have sex have to die. Mm-hmm. That whole trope. How do you feel like that played out? Where Sydney does have sex, but she lives.
I think it works here actually because he has sex with her as some sort of psychological, this is what your mother did, revenge. And so the sex is actually like weaponized in a way that it's not just like random supernatural killer smells it on you or something and then must kill you. So I like it. And it's also one of the, the film's just kind of like meta commentary things on like, this is always something that we tropically do in these kinds of movies. But I think it works because of the way that they set up the mother here as kind of the like quote unquote horror character that he's trying to punish.
I do find that interesting because I was thinking about that too. Because they go off on the famously go off on the rules of surviving a horror movie. And, if you have sex, you die. And, I said in the last episode that I feel like that trope is kind of something that was taken from Friday the 13th specifically and sort of bastardized. Mm-hmm. And I think some of that comes from in that movie / franchise, the villain is very much someone who is going after people who are actively doing that. It's very much it's a parent who is going after kids because they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in this movie, I think that the inversion works because that's not the kind of killer that's going after people here. It's very much it's a peer of the high school kids. So in that case, having sex shouldn't matter to the killer. If you're going by this sort of like weird psychoanalytical look at why these rules do and don't apply. Mm-hmm. I think the point of view of the killer is a big one as to why that does or doesn't matter, and which is why I think it doesn't really matter in Nightmare on Elm Street. Like I said, Nightmare on Elm Street, the series, is not a very sexy franchise. That's Freddy doesn't generally go after people because they've had sex or something like that. So I think it depends on where the motivation of the killer is kind of coming from.
Yeah. It's also interesting that this movie, to tie into that, this movie, Neve Campbell does not go topless in her sex scene, which is surprising, but it also, I think, makes sense that it's more mocking the trope than it's actually like. I think you could make the argument, like you're making, Clay, that Nightmare is more the sex is part of it, is part of like, it's like just like a titillating thing to have in a horror movie, kind of, and it just happens that you get killed if you have sex. Here, they have the sex, but they don't make it. It's quite literally not titillating. So
if they really wanted to blow that trope out of the water, they should both be butt naked and just like go into town.
Look, Neve Campbell didn't show her tits, just like Jamie Lee Curtis didn't show tits until she went legit.
That's right. And what was that movie called with Kevin Bacon? Is that Neve Campbell? It is Neve Campbell. What's that?
Yes.
Wild Things.
Wild Things.
Yeah.
Oh. She does not get naked in that movie.
Oh, just
I've heard.
Christmas.
I've heard. I've studiously observed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're in a scene with if you're putting a three-way sex scene with Denise Richards, I would be a little bit gun shy to take my top off too. That's all I'm saying.
Fair.
Yeah, Wild Things. We'll have to cover that at some point, I think.
Honestly, okay, that's one of those movies that I remember watching when I was younger because of the reputation that it had. And by the end of it, I was like, this is a pretty good movie. Like, aside from the nudity, this is actually a solid movie.
I mean, it's kind of a neo-noir thriller, isn't it? It's like a detective story. Yeah. So it's like Brick, only not quite as good, I guess. What was I talking about with Scream? I've completely forgotten now. What were we talking about before this? Billy, I guess? Well, let's just throw it back in. One of my actually favorite scenes is the when Billy and Stu are stabbing each other. I really enjoy that scene. I think that's good, and I think that Matt Lillard really like plays the shit out of that. Like he occasionally goes overboard, but I think his "you cut me too deep, I'm dying here" just strikes me as very funny. He's very funny in that scene.
And when he gives him the phone, he just says on the phone, "Hello."
That's a mirror of has always been my favorite scene in the movie. First of all, I'd like to talk about, before we get to my favorite part. So Sydney. It's an extension of how the parent storyline and the parents in this movie just feel so superfluous, because after Sydney gets attacked, she goes to stay at Tatum's house. They know what the MO of the killer is at this point, that he calls people on the phone. And Tatum's mom comes in and goes, "Sydney, there's a telephone call for you." And she's like, "Is it my dad?" She's like, "No, I don't know who it is." And then so she goes over and she picks the phone up. It's the killer, and the mother is completely like, "Oh my God." So then, Dewey comes out and his gun's out and everything, and then everybody leaves. And then Dewey, like, very seriously goes over and picks up the phone and goes, "Hello." And that's just the end of that's my favorite part of the movie. Also, I would like to say, when she does get attacked in her house, she calls 911 on the computer.
Oh my God!
Can you do that now?
My question in my notes, like the biggest thing I wrote was just like, did 911 ever work that way?
If they're being accurate, she has to take the phone line out of the wall, hook it up to the extension cable going from her room to like the main phone line, and then wait for AOL to boot up before she can type in 911 into the AOL. So I don't think you could do that now. I don't think you could. I don't
think 911 itself had the capability to receive that message.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
You've got mail. The one thing
you've got an emergency phone call.
They go out of their way to show how every house in this movie is like in the middle of wine country or something, and just secluded from everything else. But she types in 911 on the computer, and Dewey is there in like 35 seconds.
One thing I think that they actually seriously do well, and it's because of that scene, or it reminds me of that scene, is the chase sequences are intense, like a nicely intense speed. Like Ghostface is always just behind her, but they're running at full speed. And it's like I think they do a really good job of making. I like the fact that Ghostface is just a guy, basically. Like he never has any kind of supernatural ability, really.
The one almost supernatural seeming ability he has turns out to be the fact that he's two different people.
Right. Yeah. He can call or be somewhere else. Yeah.
It's sort of the running zombie of the slasher genre, where
the 28 Days Later style
essentially,
zombie.
yeah. Which as soon as that movie came out, I knew all the zombies were going to run after that. But it was kind of it because the slasher villain very traditionally is a slow, again taken from Michael Myers, but also very much from Friday the 13th. Very slow, lumbering, just happens to be there when you need him to be. Excuse me. A lot of running away.
It's always a surprise attack.
It's always a surprise attack. But in this one, I mean, even Freddy doesn't run. Well, he does in the first one, but
with really long arms.
Yeah. But generally, Freddy, he's a mystical creature, so he can show up wherever he needs to.
Right.
This one, he actually runs. He's a human who runs at full speed and can attack at full speed. And I think that's what makes him that much scarier. Is he attacks like a human would attack. He doesn't attack like a monster attacks.
Really effective sound and editing around the knife swiping and knife sticking into things. They really make it feel like impactful when it hits doors and stuff like that. Yeah.
Some good stab sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Did you guys have anything else about it that you're like? I like the movie. I think that it's I think it's almost a little bit hamstrung just by. I would almost like to see versions of this that were not just slasher parodies, kind of like it almost feels like it's a little bit limited just because of the fact that it's going off of slasher films, and there's really only so much that you can do with it. Not that I think the movie drags or anything, but I almost wish that it was like more all-encompassing of a horror movie. Like it took a lot from a bunch of different places and wasn't so limited in the scope of what it was doing, although that would probably water down everything and maybe not make it as cohesive.
Well, I think it lends itself to that if you wanted it to in sequels,
Scary movie. Scary movie 1 and 2.
Yeah. But, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, you run into Halloween 3 territory if you make it too different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they could have, the second one gets kind of weird. I don't know if you guys remember Scream 2 at all, but there's like this.
I don't really remember it.
I was reading or watching about that one a bit, and I guess the script was a lot less tight for that one because 30 pages of it got uploaded to the internet like as soon as it was finished.
Mm-hmm.
So they were kind of scrambling to change stuff.
Did someone accidentally dial 911 and it uploaded the entire PDF of the script?
That did happen on this movie in the Drew Barrymore scene. They forgot to unplug the phone.
Oh,
so when she's calling and screaming into 911, she was actually calling the police station.
Really? Oh, that poor person who picked up that call.
So Scream 2, the Kevin Williamson was busy with Dawson's Creek, so he couldn't be there to do rewrites and stuff. So
that makes a lot of sense that he worked on Dawson's Creek.
It's his show. I think he created it.
Yeah, yes.
So there was a lot of like
thing, though. Yeah, this is what broke him into Hollywood, basically.
There's a lot of stuff done on the fly, and there's like this weird Greek, like I don't mean like Greek tragedy and just referential, like that's like a Greek tragedy. I'm like literally Greek tragedy elements where Sydney's in college and she's in the drama group and they're doing like this classical Greek play. And like the climax takes place like on stage. It's really strange. So it gets a little bit weird. By the time you get to the fourth one, I watched the fourth one for the first time a couple years ago, and there are, if I remember correctly, 4 fake opening sequences in a row. So it's like 2 girls being really meta talking about horror movies, and then they get killed, and then it pulls out, and it's 2 other girls who are talking meta about what they just watched, and then they get killed. Then it pulls out again, and it's a third set of girls who are talking even more meta about everything else that has just happened, and that's the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Second movie kind of gas.
Second movie kind of leans because the second one it starts with people are watching the Scream, or the Scream killer has become like a phenomenon. So everyone in the audience is wearing the mask, basically. Yeah,
they've turned Gail's book has been turned into a movie.
Right,
it's become a big hit. Honestly, so that was one of the things I found interesting. The 2 things I wanted to talk about. One probably we can talk longer about than the other one. the movie, the last person on screen in this movie is Gail.
Mm-hmm.
It's her doing her news thing at the end. I thought that was a really interesting choice because she's not obviously the main character of the movie. Is that supposed to be some sort of like commentary on something? It's just an odd choice. Do you think there's anything behind that?
I mean, I like it as a choice because so the actual real life inspiration for this script in this movie was the Gainesville Ripper.
Oh,
a real serial killer in Gainesville, Florida, who killed 5 college students in something like 3 days.
Holy shit.
In 1990, and Kevin Williamson kind of heard about it, and it freaked him out so bad that he wrote a movie script in response to how horrifying that was, that this was a real life event, and it was huge in the media. And I almost think that this movie, in a lot of weird ways, kind of prefaces the current day obsession with true crime. And I'm very guilty of this myself in terms of, true crime TV shows and podcasts and all of that and how much it's blown up. And I think this movie actually examines the role that the media plays in these sorts of events and how they play out in real life. So I think having Gail, because Gail is the one who ultimately saves them.
Right. Yeah.
So in the end, she's the real, you could say she's the real hero in this because she kills the killer. She's the only reason that Sydney survives this whole ordeal. And so I think kind of having her be the last voice and the last person the last main character you see as the camera pulls out is almost a commentary kind of supporting the media coverage of these sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting is circling back just for a second to why there's so much explanation to kind of bolster the story. There's like no character work in this movie at all. These characters are completely empty.
Sydney has something.
She's got a bit. Like the stuff with the mom, I think she plays that stuff well, and I think that works well for her, but everybody else is just a complete blank slate.
It's all performance. Yeah. The strength of the character is based entirely on who the actor or actress is playing that person.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why the middle feels so weird, is because they don't do any character work. It's just, trying to get to the ending. Like there's that scene, the scene where she gets attacked in the bathroom. How long was he waiting in the bathroom? And was he was he just hoping? Because there's no way he goes in there between the time that those girls leave and she comes out, because she comes out we watch them leave.
Yeah. He's just like sitting there like, oh boy.
Yeah.
She's going to have to pee at some point.
But that aside, the other thing that I did want to mention is as far as Sydney goes as a final girl, I think she reminds me a lot of Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street because she is so proactive. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think Wes Craven likes plucky brunettes.
Yeah. He's young and brunettes is Wes Craven's thing. I don't know. I was trying to look up Last Girl thoughts about that. I don't know how I feel about it. Like it almost kind of fits into me with like the sex thing in these slasher films. It's like, what is this saying, kind of? Or is it just like a trope that has become so common that I don't think it's really saying anything at this point? Or is it, is it just like you're supposed to have the girl who does it? Like, because these movies are, it's a Is there any reason that it's not a female other than to make it seem that the killer could overpower you, right? Like, why are they females then? That's the only reason, right? It's because if this was a guy, it would be more of less of a chase thing and more of like a fight or a brawl or something. Like, is that the only reason to have a female do it, or is there supposed to be some other thing that's going on?
Unless you're Ash Williams and your entire character is that you're a huge wimp, which is kind of why Ash is the way he is in the Evil Dead movies, is because they wanted him to be essentially a male final girl type, where he's just like in that he seems like he should be be able to stand up, but he doesn't, and
Right.
he just wants nothing to do with any of this.
Yeah.
And this movie comments on it because, as you were saying, the killers make the point of like a woman couldn't be the killer because
Right.
this is like this needs the strength of like the male sex basically to like to finish it off
Well,
and stuff.
you know, it's I've always had interesting thoughts about this because horror movies were a very male-dominated genre up until probably the late 60s.
You mean
like
in terms of the
early-
characters or
Yeah, like it was very much more action angled. So
Yeah.
like even in your original Universal monster movies, the heroes were generally men who were saving women.
Yep.
You get into the 50s and it's usually men saving women from giant monsters and shit. And it's not until you get into your Texas Chainsaws and your Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist that it kind of swings back the other way. And ever since then, horror has been a very female-led genre. And I think it's interesting. I find the whole final girl thing very fascinating because it's very often looked upon as a negative and very degrading. But I think you can also read it as these movies are about women who are perceived to be without power.
yeah. They always
finding
win.
the power.
Yeah.
Finding the power to defeat a negative element, which is almost entirely always male.
Yeah, but there's also something more believably terrifying about a female victim.
Sure.
Like, there's that famous Margaret Atwood quote, which is, men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them.
Yeah.
And that's...
Should I not laugh at that? But, I mean,
No,
it's
you
a very
can laugh.
good. It's a
Margaret
good quote.
Atwood's
Yeah.
hilarious. She's brilliant. But I think that's part of why having the female victim and the final girl becomes compelling because I can't say all women, but I would say a lot of women who watch this relate to the idea of, you're being stalked. There's a male presence at some point in your life, even if it's just one night when you're walking down the street and some guy tries to follow you back to your car. Like, and it's terrifying because you feel helpless and you feel vulnerable. And then I also think it's really terrifying for a lot of men because a lot of men feel traditionally very responsible in terms of protecting the women in their lives, their mothers, their sisters, their wives, their daughters. They feel like it's their responsibility to be a bulwark against threats towards these women. So it's
men in these movies are generally fairly ineffective.
Right.
It's like they are very frequently put in that sort of position and then very quickly killed.
Yeah, look in this movie. Look at Randy.
Yeah,
Randy clearly is infatuated with Sydney. Like, he's really into her, and he just wants her to like him, and he wants her attention, but he also wants to protect her. Like, he stays at this house where people are being brutally murdered, knowing that he can't really physically stand up to this killer, but he wants to try to protect her. And so I think that, having the final girl trope plays into that for both sexes.
It's when he ties into you were talking about just like the female fear of being stalked, because females have the additional fear that females have that males do not have is rape or
is this
sexual
going to turn
assault.
into a stand-up routine, Wes?
I've been working on it.
So what's the deal with women?
What's the deal with women walking down the streets
Women
alone?
drive like this.
But like,
sorry, I cut you off.
It I guess it could somehow dovetail into the sex aspect of these slashers, where they kind of switch the rape fear into just straight up being murdered in these movies. Like the pursuit is, I don't know, there's like the sexuality or something like really just kind of hides into that or something. But
the monsters are very rarely sexual monsters.
Yeah.
It's for as brutal as they are, and I think I think Nightmare on Elm Street kind of falls under this category. They're very rarely sexual. Like, Jason is not a sexual monster.
Billy is.
Billy is. Yeah, Billy absolutely is.
I think that's part of the reason why I find him actually a really compelling villain and so unsettling, even when he's playing nice guy, is that he's very much a sexual predator in addition to being a psychopathic murderer. And there's that moment where after he and Stu have sort of revealed themselves as we are the killers, and he's got Sydney, he's like holding her in front of him and he's got the knife up to her and he's like rubbing his face in her hair and he's got his eyes closed. He's like breathing into her ear. It's very clearly for him very much a sexual thing.
Yeah. And he raped her mom.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
Just kind of push
Which
that
I feel
under
like
the
is
monster.
Yeah. I feel like it's not really emphasized.
Yeah.
that
Slasher
much.
killers very rarely rape people.
now that I'm thinking about it, the last
Literally,
girl thing,
anyway.
the last girl thing is kind of funny because it's kind of it might be one of those things where the trope exists, but it's just like the culture that exists around it really shades what's going on. So you start off movies, right,
definitely.
as you're saying, Clay, where women are not in the movies because cinema was mostly, it's going to be male dominated in that kind of action sense at that point. Then you move into the Chainsaw Massacre stuff, which is like, hey, women have boobies, and if they run, they jiggle. So let's film.
It's tittillating.
Yeah.
Right. Let's film that. And then it moves into the 90s where it's now meta-contextual feminist takes on it. So they're like the women become empowered by this, and the storyline is driven more off of that angle than anything. It might just be one of those cases where it's always been the same thing, but however the culture exists outside of it colors what you think of it.
Yeah. And I think there's been an evolution in terms of like form and theme in, kind of there are more opportunities to have women characters that are more actual characters, not just a damsel in distress and not just kind of a girl who's destined to die and like squirm around in a bikini while she does it.
I would like to say that even though I do find something potentially empowering about the final girl thing, I do recognize that in order to get there, you usually have to go through a lot of bouncing boobs.
Yeah.
It's not like each one of these movies is like an essay about female empowerment.
It's like that football practice thing where you're just running into the pads. It's just boobs everywhere. Just run.
Oh, God. And good night. Yeah. No, but I think more recent horror movies have been sort of pivoting away from that need. We've been seeing more things like The Babadook and Hereditary, where there are female characters who are very, very important to the plot. And they're not really sexualized.
Babadook is great. Babadook is like the perfect new female take on a horror movie, which is to hate your child, basically, which is like really fascinating.
I have not seen Midsommar yet.
Was great. I like Midsommar a lot.
Let's take a break. We're going to play a final clip, and we'll come back and give our final thoughts about Scream.
Corn syrup. Same stuff they use for pig's blood in Carrie.
Surprise, Sydney.
Oh, now, whoa.
What's the matter, Sydney? You look like you've seen a ghost.
Why are you doing this?
It's all part of the game, Sydney.
It's called Guess How I'm Gonna Die!
Fuck you!
I'll end this just by saying, or my point of view anyway, it's interesting when you see directors, when we do these kind of things for directors and we watch three of their movies, some directors have careers, and I'm not sure why. And that sounds really insulting, but like...
No, I know what you mean.
Like if I was a big fan of Wes Craven, right, or like if I was in Hollywood and I was an executive picking a director for my movie, I don't think Craven would pop into my mind as someone that'd be like, I'm gonna like do a real barn burner here. I was reading something that they liked Wes Craven's sense of humor. They thought that he mixed humor and horror really well, and we talked about that before we even did Scream, about he's fairly effective at doing that. But at the same time, he's not really like a stylist of a director that I'd be like, I got to get Wes Craven. Like, this thing is not going to work without Wes Craven. I feel like you could have done Scream with a lot of directors, like Raimi could have done it and things like that. So it's interesting to me that Craven has built this career, and he's obviously hugely influential and everything. And I don't think he's a bad director, but he's not. He's a workman director more than anything, and I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think I said something along those lines in Vampire in Brooklyn, where when I think of Wes Craven, I don't think of visual style. I don't look at a movie and go, oh, this must be a Wes Craven movie. Like there's, for whatever reason, yeah, he's very much a workman style director. And I was watching a Red Letter Media review of Scream 4, and one of the guys said something that was pretty dead on, which is Wes Craven movies are either really good or really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And when he hits it, he knocks it out of the park generally. But when he doesn't, then they're pretty rough. And I think what makes him, unfortunately, in the horror genre, what makes you a master and what makes you like someone that people talk about and you come back to is you have more than one good movie. Doesn't have to be more than two, but it's generally more than one. You know, because like a lot of these guys, you know, George Romero, John Carpenter probably has the best batting average out of a lot of these guys. But,
Probably.
that's debatable on what you consider to be a quote unquote good movie.
I think watching these have elevated Halloween for me. Halloween is like a more Halloween has like a cinema style to it. Like it's very much a movie that he also has this idea to do. And I think it's really clever.
Yeah, it has an ambiance to it.
Yes, in a way that Nightmare doesn't, I don't think, and Scream doesn't really. Like, there's something, like, it's not all jump scares in Halloween. Like, that thing where Myers comes out of the shadows and his face is there.
There's a lot of those moments where he's just sort of lingering in the background or outside of windows. But I would just like to say, I think I said this something like this when we talked about Nightmare Before Christmas.
Nightmare Before Elm Street.
A Nightmare Before Elm Street. I think Wes Craven's strength is that he was really excellent at tapping into the style of the day.
Sure.
Like, I mean, he was almost 60 years old when he made Scream.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive. I know there's writers and all sorts of other folks who contributed and did a ton of work on it, but he was still the director. And I think he captured that sort of mid-90s teen vibe really accurately in a way that is unexpected from like a 58-year-old dude.
Yeah. I think just generally his horror movies work because he gets it. Like he understands the genre. That's why he can invert it or subvert it so well.
Yeah.
Like he knows back in his first movies, he knows what works there to get a rise out of people. Nightmare on Elm Street, he took everything that had come before it and kind of turned it on its head. And that's what he did in Scream as well. He understands it. And I think unfortunately, I think he was kind of bored by it because he even turned this movie down at first because he didn't want to do another horror movie.
And he had just done Vampire before this too. He's like, I'm done with horror. New Nightmare.
New Nightmare, yeah.
Oh, right.
And so I think he just was, I believe he was kind of bored with the genre, but I think that's because he just knows how to do it very effectively. Whether or not it's an A+ every time, I don't know, but he knows how to get us pretty solid, scary movie out of it.
Yeah, he's like a mimic. Like he can sort of mimic and inhabit the trends and the tropes and the themes and especially whatever's pertinent right now, but he doesn't have that unique, like stand on its own style.
Right.
I think that's what I think that's kind of how I think about Workman when I would describe him, because to me, Scream was a success because of the script. Like, I think a lot of people could have directed this movie, and it would have been fine in anybody's hands. I don't think Craven is really the reason that this was pushed over the edge. He probably helped it, and he made like the mix a little bit better. But I think the script is really what changed things for these kinds of movies at that point. So he's Workman in that I think if you give Craven a good script, he has places to go with it, but he's not going to save a bad script. He's not that kind of a director.
Sure. Yeah.
Fair.
I would agree with that.
You guys have any final thoughts before we're done?
My only final thought is, for a series that was started off as something very subversive and very sharp in its meta-ness, it never really manages to keep that going through the series. And I know obviously we didn't watch the other movies, but from what I remember of them, it just keeps turning the camera in on itself. And like I would have liked to have seen, as it goes on, take a look at how like you were saying, how the approach to some of this kind of stuff has changed, or whether that's horror or the way people take in violence in general, instead of just sort of becoming an in-joke on top of an in-joke. And I wish some stuff had changed, like I wish they had done one where the killer actually, you couldn't kick his ass. Like that was the big change, is that in this one he was actually really effective. Because then he would be scary again,
job.
you know? Yeah, he was actually good at his job. But yeah, it's one of those series that I think as it went on had a little bit more potential to be continually biting in its satire. Unfortunately, didn't go that way.
Amanda?
I feel like this movie is an excellent time capsule. Like, watching this will make you, if you were alive in 1996 and you remember anything around that time, watching this movie will bring you right back to whatever you were doing around that time, whether or not you want to remember it.
Straightening your bangs. Just hours of bang straightening.
Yeah. Or, painting your nails with glitter nail polish because you're... Yeah.
All of my shoes were plastic and see-through.
Yeah. I was sitting on an inflatable chair while I watched this.
Laughing at David Arquette. Just laughing it up.
I just have to say, I remember thinking he looked so old. When I first watched this movie, I remember thinking that David Arquette looked extraordinarily old. Like him and Courtney Cox, they looked super old. And now I watch this movie and I think
They're
the
17.
the two of them look really young, and then a bunch of the friends look very old.
I don't think anybody in this is a convincing teenager.
I
remember at the
these
time
47-year-olds who are running around pretending they're in high school.
Even at the time, I remember thinking, "There's no way Rose McGowan is 17."
Yes, yeah. Rose McGowan sticks out. I had a funny thing with Amy. Amy always does this, but it's the perfect movie for it. She's so we're watching it, and Courtney Cox and Arquette have their first scene together. And she's like, this is where they met and fell in love. I'm like, yep. No, we sit there quiet for a minute. She's like, you think they're still, she's like, are they still married? Like, I don't know. But it's just, Amy, she's always very interested in the relationship of how the relationship is going for a celebrity, as they were in a movie and now you're unsure of where they are. But I always strikes me as very funny to be concerned about whether or not they're still married. But it strikes me.
But they actually had really good chemistry. Like in that scene where they end up, they're sort of almost like driven off the road by the teenagers driving by.
Yep.
And I actually found that very endearing, and it's very clear that they had genuine chemistry together. Interesting
pair. What a strange pairing of a celebrity.
Very unusual.
This is not the what is that? I can't think of that horrible Team Z, right? This is not a Team Z podcast or anything like that, but we'll end it there, I guess. We're done with Scream. We did Wes Craven. We covered Vampire in Brooklyn at 10%. We covered Nightmare on Elm Street, which is 94%, and Scream, which is 17%.
So there you go. That was our discussion of Scream. Amanda, how do you feel about the placement of Scream on this list? It's number 175. Do you think it should be higher? Do you think it should be lower?
I think it should be higher.
Yeah.
For as much as I kind of was giving some crap about that blurb and it talking about it revitalized the genre, it kind of did. So I think its impact on horror through the 90s and the early aughts was big enough that I think it should be higher.
It spawned a parody franchise. It became so ubiquitous that not only did they make a parody of it, but that parody extended itself into a franchise of that parody. They made 5 scary movies.
Oh my God, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it became its own franchise, and then it spawned a parody that also spawned a franchise, and it also spawned copycats like crazy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean it horror was kind of dead in the 90s, and it really just it really brought things back with a bit of a twist to it, but I don't think that can be.
Would you say it brought it back from the grave?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I don't think that can really be understated, though, with this, because it really did kind of bust things open, and is still referenced today. So I do think it should be higher, especially on the list where it is. It's kind of wedged in. It's in a weird place. Your Next, which we talked about last time, is actually higher than this, which is surprising. Yeah, because I would say I liked Your Next, but I think this has a lot more cultural zeitgeist attached to it than Your Next did. So,
yeah, I would actually argue that Your Next kind of owes a little bit to Scream.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, this as we decided already, this list is questionable at best. So we've come up on I'm doing a little bit of creative math here because we switched our wild card and our Christmas episode. So we did the Christmas one and then the wild card. It should have been vice versa. But I'm now in my head switching them back. So we are now on our 5th movie because I want to make sure that we keep these things relatively. I'm bad at
close
math.
to the 5s.
Yeah, I'm bad at math, so I want to keep them as close to the 5s as possible. So we're up on our next wild card pick, which is yours, Amanda. What do you got for us?
I want us to do the movie from 2016, A Dark Song.
Ooh, I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's weird.
What's can you give me a one-line breakdown of what it is? Or is it better that I go in not knowing?
Well, I can tell you that it is an Irish independent horror movie.
Okay.
About a woman and a man in a very remote house.
You know what? I think I did see this movie, actually, now that I'm looking it up.
See, I didn't want to say too much, but I kind of was wondering. I was like, if he did see this, he'll probably know just from, like, vaguely United Kingdom Irish actors.
I wasn't sure until you said 2 people in a remote house, and I'm pretty sure I did watch this. Okay, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely... I like it. I'm very curious. I haven't rewatched it in a while, and I'm very curious to do so, and I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about it.
I am too, because if this is the movie I think it is, I did not like it the first time I watched it.
This is the beginning of Amanda's wild cards that Clay hates.
Hey, I'm more than happy to get into it because that's what I want to do. See stuff that I'm not immediately prone to find on my own. So all for it.
Well, you're welcome.
Anyway, that's going to do it for Scream. Thank you guys for joining us. If you like what you heard, if you want to give us a rating or review on iTunes, that would be great. Amanda, thank you for joining me.
Of course. Thank you, Clay.
And we will see you next time with A Dark Song.
Bye, everyone.